Well, I'd like to invite you to join me in Genesis 39. We're in Genesis 39 this morning. We're going to look at the entirety of the chapter, all 23 verses. If you're using the blue ESV Bible in the seat backs out there, you can find our text on page 33. We're in Genesis 39. The title of our sermon is Woman Folly. The book of Proverbs compares wisdom and folly to two different women, respectively. Lady Wisdom offers a house, sturdy with 7 pillars, slaughtered beast and mixed wine, and a prepared table. She calls to man, offering bread and drink, that he may leave behind his simple ways, his immaturity. She invites him to walk in the light. Woman Folly is loud. She is seductive, but knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house. She takes a seat at the highest places of the town, and she calls to all who pass by, who are going straight on their way. She says, "Whoever is simple, let him turn in here." And to him who lacks sense, she says, "Stolen water is sweet. Bread eaten in secret is pleasant." But we're told by the proverb that the man who turns aside does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. There's a subtle but distinct difference between the two. Woman Folly tries to sound a lot like Lady Wisdom, but what she offers is vain, and what she gives is deadly. Today in Genesis 39, as we pick back up with Joseph and his narrative, we come face to face with Woman Folly. The last we saw of Joseph, he had just arrived in Egypt after being sold into slavery by his older brothers. They had hated him because he was their father's favorite. They had nearly killed him, but at the last moment, Reuben's self-interest, along with Judah's ability to turn a profit, saved Joseph's life. So rather than being murdered, he was sold as a slave. And as we get into chapter 39 here, we notice, first of all, things could be much worse. We'll see that the Lord is with Joseph. He's gone from being his dad's favorite to being his master's favorite. And yet, there is a deadly serpentine figure lurking in the shadows in Potiphar's house. Joseph is still a relatively young man at this point, and he is about to face a tremendous test. We've not seen much of his character, but what we have seen thus far, he seemed a bit immature in the last narrative section about him in chapter 37. What will he do? What will happen to him in this great test? Stolen water is sweet, Joseph. Bread eaten in secret, it's pleasant. Come and take your fill is the offer on the table, as we'll see. So let's read these verses, and then I will run through our outline, and then we'll get to work on them. Beginning in verse 1 of Genesis 39. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had and in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house. Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home, and she told him the same story, saying, 'The Hebrew servant whom you brought among us came in to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house.' As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, 'This is the way your servant treated me,' his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed." Well, we'll consider the passage in three headings this morning. First, in verses 1 through 6, we see Joseph advance in Potiphar's house. Second, in verses 7 through 18, we see Joseph assaulted by Potiphar's wife. And third, in verses 19 to 23, we see Joseph arrested by Potiphar's guards. He advances in Potiphar's house, he is assaulted by Potiphar's wife, and he is arrested by Potiphar's guards. Let's look together then in the first place at verses 1 to 6, where we see Joseph advance within Potiphar's house. We're told plainly that Joseph has been brought down into Egypt by the Ishmaelites, and he is now in the service of the captain of the guard, an Egyptian named Potiphar. And quickly, it seems, Joseph moves up the ranks. First thing we notice is that he is placed within Potiphar's house rather than being placed out in the field to do work. Through his work and its success, he is then made Potiphar's personal assistant, and then he is given charge of everything within Potiphar's house. The only thing that was not under Joseph's purview was the food that Potiphar ate, we're told. Some see this as a euphemism for Potiphar's wife, and that's possibly the case because that's what Joseph seems to say to her later in the passage, but it's most likely a reference to just the literal food that Potiphar ate, since according to Genesis 43:32, it was an abomination for Egyptians to eat with Hebrews. And so it's unlikely that Potiphar would have allowed Joseph to cook and prepare and serve his food for him. But otherwise, other than that, maybe his most private affairs, Joseph is placed in charge of everything that Potiphar has. And so through this series of promotions, he is second in command in almost every respect. Not even Potiphar is greater in the house than Joseph is. And obviously, it's important to note how hard Joseph likely worked. He seems to be an extremely diligent man. But we must not miss the ultimate cause of all of this. It wasn't Joseph, it was the Lord. Verse 2 tells us the Lord was with Joseph. Verse 3 tells us that his master could tell that the Lord was with him, that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. But what's more, not only is God with Joseph, blessing his labors, but he's blessing Potiphar and his household for Joseph's sake. In verse 5. And so here we see in Joseph's experience in Egypt a foretaste of how the families of the earth were to find blessing through the family of Abraham. And in some ways, all of this, these opening verses, they're reminiscent of the garden in Eden. Adam, in a sense, second in command within the garden. So too is Joseph here in Potiphar's house. Adam was able to eat freely of every tree in the garden, save one. So too Joseph is free to enjoy the bounty of Potiphar's house. And whatever exactly the food comment means in verse 6, verse 9 makes it clear that only one thing, or rather one person, was forbidden from Joseph: Potiphar's wife. Adam chose folly and sin over wisdom and righteousness. And so in this introduction here to this section of Joseph's narrative, we're led to ask the question, well, what will Joseph choose? What will become of him in this seemingly this Edenic type paradise that he is now in Potiphar's house? What will he do? And so let's consider, secondly, his assault in verses 7 through 18. Really, we're picking up here at the very end of verse 6. We're told that Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. We've heard of Sarah and Rebekah's beauty, but only Rachel, Joseph's mother, was described as beautiful in form and appearance in chapter 29, verse 17. As it turns out, men can be handsome too. And it also turns out beauty at times can be a curse. Potiphar's wife, who shall remain nameless, she cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she's quite taken with the man. And eventually, she invites him to lie with her. And Joseph responds with an airtight argument. He says, I've been put in charge of everything that is in this house. No one is greater than I am. The only thing that my master has withheld from me is you, because you are his wife. And then he asks a most wonderful question. How can I sin against God and commit such a great act of wickedness? His argument works along three lines. He says, in other words, no, I can't do this. One, because it would be an abuse of the trust that has been given to me in this position that I'm in. Two, it would betray my master, who has entrusted me with this great responsibility. But three, and most significant and important of all, he says it would be a great sin against God. As David recognized in Psalm 51, after his sin with Bathsheba, he says to the Lord, against you and you only have I sinned. Our sin, we see here, is first and foremost, most importantly, most centrally, when we sin, it is against God. Doesn't mean we don't actually sin against other people, but it is fundamentally against God. And so it's a well-reasoned argument from Joseph. Unfortunately, logic and reason have no power amongst fools. We're told that day after day she would speak to him. She would invite him to come to her, to come lie with her, but he would not listen. Neither would he lie with her or even be around her. He avoided her like the plague as best he could. But one day, seemingly unknowingly, somehow he ends up in the house alone with her. He's there to work, to go about his business, but the other men of the household are out. And so she takes advantage of the situation. She catches him by the garment, urging him once more to lie with her. And like a boss, he bounced. He fled leaving the garment behind. He got out of the house as quickly as he could. Temptation came and grabbed him by the shirt, and he ran for it. Unfortunately, this act of righteousness is the very thing that she would use against him later. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, they say. It's not actually true, but this woman has fury indeed. She sees the garment in her hand. She's put off, she's put out, she's angry, and so she immediately begins to enact a wicked plan. She calls out to the men of the household. They come running inside at the commotion, and she accuses Joseph of trying to rape her. She wins their sympathy by poisoning the well with a racial slur against Joseph, this Hebrew that has been brought into this house. The Egyptians were descended from Noah's son Ham, and so pointing out Joseph's ancestor, Eber, son of Shem, Ham's brother, this was purposeful. There's an animosity here that she's playing on, using for advantage. And she tells them that this Hebrew has come in to laugh at us. This word laugh, it's being used in a very similar way as it was used back in Genesis 26, when Abimelech saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah. As we noted then, the use of this word in its various forms throughout Isaac's narrative, it seems to highlight there in chapter 26 that Isaac was not acting in good faith toward Abimelech and the Philistines. And so now, the very next time this word is used, the narrator allows Potiphar's wife to describe Joseph's behavior with this word of laughter, demonstrating very clearly that she is accusing Joseph of the same kind of mocking, insulting behavior through sexual morality that in some way was being highlighted by Isaac's dishonesty amongst the Philistines. But she doesn't end there. It's a Hebrew has come into the house. He's come in to laugh, and he's come in to laugh at whom? At us. She identifies herself with the men of the household. We're in this together, guys. She cunningly brings them in as objects of Joseph's scorn. And only now does she say what the actual accusation is. She says, he's come in to lie with me. But when I cried out, he fled. She then, verse 16, she lays the garment by her side until his master came home. She's holding on to this garment, clutching this tunic all day, stewing, boiling with anger and malice. And when Potiphar arrives, she tells him the same story. This is this Hebrew servant you brought in here. He's come in to laugh at me. She blames Potiphar subtly, but she blames him. She makes herself and only herself the object of scorn. It's not us this time, but it's me. And she shows him the forsaken garment as evidence. And so we ask the question, what will Joseph do? He's in this Edenic type situation. He is blessed by the Lord, succeeding in the work of his hands. But a serpent comes and offers something to him, something desirable. As far as this test goes, Joseph, we could say, is passed with flying colors. He resisted day after day after day. We don't know how long this went on. Was it a week, a few weeks, a year? And even when he was physically assaulted by this woman, he left. So he's passed this test, in a sense. But what will be the result? Well, we see that in the remainder of the chapter in verses 19 to 23. Look with me in the third place. Verses 19 to 23, Joseph gets arrested. Potiphar, he hears this. This is how the Hebrew you brought in treated me, and he's incensed by this tale. He's furious. As far as we know, he doesn't ask any questions. He doesn't ask her any questions. He doesn't ask Joseph any questions. He doesn't ask the men of the household any questions. He simply throws Joseph in prison. Now, he didn't ask any questions, but a few questions come to my mind. One, why doesn't he ask any questions? Another one, why does he put Joseph in prison rather than having him executed? If this was an attempted rape and it only failed because she cried out, seems quite likely that that would have been the proper response. But a third question, why doesn't Joseph seem to say anything? Why doesn't he protest? Well, the third question, I think, is relatively easy to answer. Maybe he did. Maybe he did tell the truth. We just aren't told about it. But the evidence against him, it's planted evidence, it's false evidence, but it involved his garment that he had left behind. It involved a woman's deceitful testimony and the men of the household's flawed, manipulated testimony. So maybe he didn't say anything because he knew he was doomed. Or maybe he didn't say anything for another reason, which we'll think a bit more about later. But when I think about those first two questions, about why Potiphar does what he does, it's sort of an interesting response. And the two responses, they kind of seem to contradict one another. On the one hand, Potiphar seems to take his wife's word at face value. And seemingly without any further investigation, he imprisons Joseph simply on the grounds of an accusation. But on the other hand, he shows some level of restraint by simply placing him in prison rather than having him executed. What's more, and what's very interesting, is that as captain of the guard, it seems that Joseph actually remains somewhat under Potiphar's oversight. We see this more clearly in chapter 40, verses 3 to 4. We learn there that Joseph, he's in prison in the house of the captain of the guard. And it's the captain of the guard who tells Joseph specifically to attend to the cupbearer and the baker, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, when they are imprisoned. Possibly all it is that Potiphar knows that Joseph has the Midas touch, as it were. And he thinks it would be a shame to kill this blessed laborer. Perhaps he knows there's something more going on than his wife is letting on. So he imprisons him rather than killing him to both maintain some level of respect. I can't do nothing, but also I still want to benefit from this person. We're not told what his motives are, and so we can't be sure, but we do see clearly in this passage the ultimate cause. Because as soon as we're told that Joseph has been in prison, we read that the Lord was with him. In verse 21, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And once again, Joseph is placed in charge of everything. He goes from father's favorite to Potiphar's favorite to the keeper of the prison's favorite. And the Lord was with him. Whatever Joseph did, he succeeded at it because of the Lord. There are a few observations I want to make here that begin to touch on a bit of application. The first thing is that not every accusation is true. We need to make sure not to assume that we've heard the whole story when we've heard one side of the story. This is what Proverbs 18:17 warns against. The one who states his case first seems right till the other comes and examines him. And so in a situation like this, which we would say, call it sexual abuse allegations, must be handled wisely. On the one hand, it is atrocious that many women have in fact been subjected to mistreatment of magnitudes that I can hardly even imagine. And adding insult to injury, it is tragic when any woman has come forward to report such and been dismissed because she was a woman. We should vehemently reject such wicked partiality. But as we see here, we shouldn't swing to the other side, to the other ditch, and simply and naively believe any and all claims that someone may make, a woman or otherwise. Potiphar would have done well to have stopped and asked a few questions, perhaps even one question. Indeed, we must take claims of abuse of whatever kind very seriously. But we must also desire to operate within the world of reality. So does it mean that pastors and churches should function as detectives and judges and juries? After all, we have detectives, judges, and juries for that. But we should want to know the truth. Wisdom dictates prioritizing safety while facts are established. But we must remember that an accusation doesn't equal a conviction. Here's a hard truth about living in this world. Sometimes men really do rape and abuse women. Genesis 34 tells us that very plainly. Sometimes women really do tell lies. In Genesis 39. So what do we do? Well, I can't pretend to say all that could be said on such a topic in one sermon, but here are a few things to consider by way of application here. First and foremost, we need to be people who conduct ourselves in honorable ways at all times. Genesis 39 sets on a pedestal, as it were, praises the integrity of Joseph. And it condemns the lustful infidelity, deception, and manipulation of Potiphar's wife. And I want to make two subsets of applications here. One for men, one for women. You could probably apply both of these things to men and women together, but we'll take our lead from the passage. Men, be like Joseph. Be men of integrity. Love the truth. Love honesty. Integrity isn't valuable because it makes our lives easy. It's valuable because it pleases God. We need to resist with every fiber of our being the draw of temptation, both from within and from without. If you think about Pilgrim's Progress, Part 2, you have Madam Bubble, who comes and presents herself to Mr. Standfast. She offers him herself and all manner of such things, and he resists to the point of crying out for help. Like Madam Bubble came for him, woman Folly, brothers, seeks our lives. Consider the words of Proverbs 7. With much seductive speech she persuades him. With her smooth talk she compels him. All at once he follows her, as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a stag is caught fast till an arrow pierces its liver, as a bird rushes into a snare. He does not know that it will cost him his life. This is, of course, not in any way a statement about women, but about specific kinds of women. And we need to flee sexual morality, men and women together. We need to flee it with all our might. We need to flee it in person, and we need to flee it online. Sexual morality violates trust. It betrays others. And it is a great sin against God. Ladies, don't be like Potiphar's wife. Of course, at a most fundamental level, that means continue to be faithful in your marriages. But it also means that you should tell the truth. Don't seek to manipulate the people around you. Right? Potiphar's wife, her scheme works because there is something particularly despicable about a man who would violate a woman in such a way. We saw it in the anger of Dinah's brothers when it happened to her. We condemned Jacob because he didn't seem to care much about what had happened to Dinah. We see it in the anger of Potiphar here. She knew this. Potiphar's wife knew exactly what to say to get what she wanted. She knew what to tell the men of the household to get them on her side. She knew what to say to Potiphar. Even if Potiphar knew she was lying or suspected it, and that is why he didn't ultimately execute Joseph, he knew he couldn't prove it, but neither could he do nothing about it. So ladies, don't be like her. Don't attempt to control the people in your life through half-truths, turns of phrase, cleverly devised schemes. We saw the wicked woman in Proverbs 7:21 described this way. With seductive speech she persuades him. With her smooth talk she compels him. This is good advice, good counsel for all of us. But ladies, avoid the use of smooth, flattering, or seductive talk as a manipulative tactic to lead others astray. So if we sum up this whole first point, the idea for every single one of us, be honorable. Seek to live a just and holy life. Have integrity like Joseph, whether you're a man or a woman. Whether you're a man or a woman, refuse to be unfaithful, refuse to be deceptive, refuse to manipulate others. Another lesson that we all can learn from this is the destruction that results from abused authority and power. Potiphar's wife, in some very real sense, had all the cards, at least as it concerns the dynamic between her and Joseph. She taunted him, toyed with him, played with him every day after day. He valiantly refused to the best of his ability, yet she refused to be denied. When she makes an actual formal physical advance against him, he runs away, but she uses his integrity against him. It's not clear at all what else he could have done. Could he have told Potiphar beforehand? You wouldn't believe what your wife said to me today. It's not so obvious that he had that option. When husbands lord over their wives, parents lord over their children, bosses over their employees, pastors over their congregation, presidents and kings over their subjects, people get hurt. It's what Jesus says to his disciples. That's how it is amongst the Gentiles, the heathens. Not so among you. Misused authority wreaks havoc in the world. And so, whatever level of authority and power you have in the spheres of influence, wield it well. Wield it with humility. Wield it with wisdom. Wield it for the sake of Christ and His kingdom, for the good of those that are in your care. We want to use our authority and the power that we have, whatever it may be, so that those in our care flourish rather than flounder. We use it for their good rather than our own. Another application to draw from this, remember, obedience does not always lead to immediate reward. You've heard it said, no good deed goes unpunished. Joseph's act of obedience, his demonstration of integrity, actually turned out in the short term worse for him. At least possibly. Turned out worse for him than if he had given into her request. If he had simply gone along with her seduction, it's possible that no one, so to speak, would have been any the wiser. He could have continued overseeing Potiphar's house and on the side seeing Potiphar's wife. It could have been a nice, lucrative, pleasurable arrangement for years. But what would that have done to his soul? What misery would it have wrought in his person to have given in and never been caught? To have gone to the grave living such a life. In the long run, it would have been far worse. Yes, the immediate aftermath of his obedience is imprisonment. But that's far better than to have destroyed his soul through indulgence and infidelity. We've seen this before in Genesis, so I don't want to belabor the point here. But brothers and sisters, don't look to your immediate circumstances to determine whether or not God is pleased with you. Over and over in this passage, we are told God was with Joseph in slavery and in prison. Now, it might be easy to say, yeah, but clearly his hands were blessed. His work flourished and prospered. Mine's floundering right now. Maybe you have unconfessed sin. Maybe that's why your life is what it is, if it's struggling at the moment. But maybe not. Maybe you are living for the Lord, and He is sanctifying you. He is refining you. God was with Joseph, and Joseph was in prison because he wouldn't sin against God. A last thing for us to take from this, remember, Joseph was sentenced to prison for the sins of another. And so too did Jesus go to the cross for the sins of another. Whether Joseph protested or not, we can't say for sure. But isn't there something very Christ-like in the text's non-attribution of protestation to his lips? The text doesn't tell us that Joseph said anything in protest, in self-defense. Doesn't that remind you of someone? Doesn't that sound like something you've read somewhere else? Doesn't it sound like the servant of the Lord who was oppressed, he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth? Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. And they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. As Joseph goes into prison, seemingly without complaint, so too does God's suffering servant go to his slaughter in silence. Jesus did not scorn or rebuke those who condemned and executed him. The only words are words of love and kindness. He prays for them. He suffered for them. He suffers for us. Joseph was condemned for the sin of Potiphar's wife. And even if he did go without complaint, he didn't go to prison for her sake, in her place to do her good. But that is precisely what Jesus did. That is why he suffered. He suffered for our sake. He died in our place. And he did so willingly. And so, friends, a final word. Once again, look to Jesus, the greater Joseph, and live.